we're seeing lots of refugees coming through. We're seeing Poles having to deal with this. I think if you want to do the maths really roughly, and there are no official figures, but if you want to extrapolate from how many people are being housed by private families in Warsaw, you could make the argument that 1 in 40 people, in Poland is now living with a Ukrainian refugee, which is astounding. So there's that. Go, sorry.
I just thought that maybe we will talk about that a little bit more later, but now I would like to hear more about you and your impressions and your opinions, because that's what is important in our meeting, is the fact that you are from Australia, you are working in Poland, you are on the ground doing all this field work, and I would like to hear really what you are doing, how hard you are working as a journalist. And also another question I have is, do you think that being bilingual and coming from Australia and having a Western outlook gives you a particular advantage in assessing the situation in Poland, say comparing, for example, with purely Polish journalists? Do you find that sometimes you see issues differently?
Okay, so I'll answer the first question first. Normally, absolutely. I think it's really great to have that perspective and always have in your imagination, in your mind, that you are speaking to an Anglo-Saxon audience, because I'm obviously an English language journalist, so it's Australia, it's the UK, it's US, although it's just a broadly international audience. Yeah, absolutely. I see things that Polish people don't see, and I see things that I would say that Anglophonic people who maybe don't have that sort of, they don't have the language, first of all, the Polish language, and they don't have maybe a sort of an intimate relationship with the country. Yeah, I think I see things differently to them. However, I don't think that's at all important in this situation, because every journalist in Europe now is a war reporter. So every single person is having to cover something that is very foreign to them. I mean, obviously we know if you want to be a war reporter, you go across, you leave Europe, you go somewhere else to another country, and you become a war reporter. But to have war visited upon you and upon the spaces that you normally work in, that's the sort of dominant paradigm that ends up functioning there. So I would say that anything that I knew of myself as a journalist has really shifted in the last month, in the last 6 weeks. First of all, I'm not somebody that deals with geopolitics at all. I deal with sort of invisible social, cultural issues, particularly from, I would say, more of a leftist perspective. Obviously, I don't, I report objectively, but some of the questions can be a little bit strange, a little bit off-center. But now I'm also operating in a geopolitical framework, in a liberal democratic framework too, because we're having to make decisions about who we're actually, whose back we have, right? Do we accept that Russia should be allowed to invade Ukraine, or do we support Ukraine in this, especially when we're dealing with war that's also happening on the information level? So very strong lines have had to be drawn, where I never thought I would have to engage in that kind of discourse. But otherwise, on a very, very basic sort of level, you're running around all day. All the journalists are running around physically. You're physically running around, because what you're doing when you're in Poland is you're reporting mainly on the movement of people. Obviously, there's stuff that happens on a more abstract level, but really, and we'll return to this too, I mean, the government assistance or the discourse around refugee help is actually quite small. So most of what happens is actually running around from like Helm. I was in Helm, then I was in Lublin, then I was in Poznań, then I was in Przemyśl, then I was in Biała Podlaska. And that is something that you as a journalist, possible, and I don't think it's got anything to do with what age you are, what generation you are. It's just suddenly that we have to report and we have to deal with an entire new thing. So, you know, I'm physically on my feet all the time. You know, I have all these smart, what are they called, power packs. I have, you know, my laptop and everything. The people that I encounter on the border become the most significant people, right? Because you spend all of your time with them, and it's sort of hard to then come back to Warsaw and talk to your friends who maybe haven't engaged with it in the same way. So it's a very, you know, it's a very in-body sort of experience, which I think a lot of journalists, particularly because journalism lost so much money in the last 10 to 20 years moving to online, we didn't have money for reporting. So we were all just writing from in front of the computer, right? Like we were you know, writing up news releases, press releases, basically. And now suddenly there's a lot of money being pumped into reporting. So you're seeing this sort of resurgence of old-fashioned, on the ground, grassroots kind of journalism.
Yes, and I think that's extremely important experience that you can sort of transfer to us, because when we watch the images here on TV, it's absolutely heartbreaking to see what war does to people. And particularly your generation was lucky until now not to experience war firsthand. So how are you and your maybe younger colleagues coping with the situation? We would like to hear about your personal experiences and emotions. What was your most frightening experience? What was your saddest experience? And maybe what was your happiest experience during that last period of few weeks?
Well, I will say that, first of all, I think anyone that's reporting hasn't seen war before, right? Because it actually has been this kind of war, right? Unless you are deliberately a war correspondent. So I don't think it's necessarily just a generational thing. I think it has more to do with how the newsrooms are operating and how much contact people have with war. To be honest, I feel I'm quite lucky because I'm running on adrenaline all the time. I have something to do. I have tasks to do. I don't have time to engage with my own emotions. I feel very lucky that I can do that instead of sitting in Warsaw freaking out about the war, because I mean, obviously, many of you know what it is to be Polish and to grow up within the shadow of wars. So there's sort of like psychological fault lines are there. So when you have Russia invading Ukraine, it's extremely psychologically destabilizing. And I can see among my friends, when I do have a chance to actually see them, that there's been a shift, and everyone is responding to it differently, right? Everyone has their own psychological mechanisms and their own responsibilities in their lives, so they have different responses. And sometimes it's very hard to meet together and have a conversation about it because everyone's dealing with it differently. So I don't think I've processed it very much in any way, and probably won't for a long time, simply because I'm putting all of my energy into this work. But when I do have some time to myself, it really is. I can see I'm extremely angry at anyone who outside of Poland who isn't willing to sit with the reality of this war. I think that's the strongest emotion now. So trying to talk with my friends in Australia, or trying to talk to maybe my Twitter followers, so the people I normally write to when I'm writing out into the world, some sort of distancing from the truth of this war, that it is happening, and it means that we really have to deal with politics differently, and actually recognize that actually geopolitics is back as a major framework. When people don't recognize that, I get extremely angry. I can feel that's when I get angry, because it's also meaning that everything that you're seeing is rendered invisible. It's rendered pointless.
Yes.
But in terms of, I mean, I think you know, you feel this deep existential unease all the time, because you don't know, should I also be, okay, I'm reporting on this, but should I also be selling my flat? Should I be, you know, selling my flat, moving my money out of Poland? You know, questions that you never think that you have to ask. So it's, yeah, it happens, it appears on different levels. In terms of happy stories, sad stories. What was the third category?
Oh, this maybe the saddest and the happiest. But look, it's really, you don't have to go to that if it's difficult for you.
No. No, it's these are important conversations. The saddest, I think, was, these things hit you sideways. So I was on the train coming back from Shemesh, having seen all of these women and children crossing the border, which, en masse is obviously very striking. One thing that I'll say is that I've never been in a place where I've seen so many people crying, but to themselves. Because, everyone has come off the train with their own life, with their own losses, and everyone is sort of privately processing it. And usually when you see people crying in a group, it's some sort of like shared experience. But there was a lot of this, just people just sort of sitting with their emotions, having just come off the train or waiting at the train station, and you could see that they had been crying. That was really striking. But then when I was catching the train from Przemyśl to Warsaw, I think, I was off work, right? So I was going back to Warsaw, and I was in a carriage with, in a compartment with other Poles, and I was off work, so I wasn't engaging with this issue. And there was this guy sitting across from me, and he was sleeping the whole time. And I think I even spilled water on his phone, and I was extremely apologetic, and he said he didn't care, which made me think he didn't understand that I'd spilled water on his phone. Anyway, when we got off the train, he asked, "Is this Warsaw West?" And I said, "No, we've missed Warsaw West." And he was so crestfallen, because it turns out that he had walked 65 kilometers to the border with a massive trunk of a suitcase, massive, like in those old kind of trunks, so not like a modern suitcase, but an old heavy leather trunk, which thankfully had wheels. Had crossed over the border after waiting there forever, for days, because that's what happens. Then caught a bus to Przemyśl, caught a train from Przemyśl to Warsaw, which was the train I was on. And all he wanted was to get to the airport to catch his flight out to the UK. And he'd missed the stop where there's the bus shuttle to the airport, and he was just a mess. And I was trying to help him find this taxi, which ended up being successful. But one of the things that really hit me was that he was limping. Like, I've never seen anyone limp like this. He could barely move, and I was trying to take the suitcase from him, but he just wouldn't take it from me. So it's these things that, you're in a normal situation. You're just taking the train home, to your family, to your apartment. I had just moved into a new apartment, and then suddenly the war kind of comes out and hits you, right? These really exceptional situations. In terms of the happiest, I don't know if I don't think, obviously, happy is much of a category. I mean, satisfied that someone has gotten through, that there's been some sort of successful resolution to something, but maybe the zoo story, where there was, and I wrote about this for the Times. I followed a woman from Poznan who was rescuing tigers and lions and a few other animals from a wildlife park outside Kiev. And, it had many sort of like narrative points to it, where the truck that was supposed to be taking the animals over ended up being surrounded by Russian tanks and was liberated by Ukrainian partisans. So you couldn't make this up. And then the animals finally, after many difficulties, ended up crossing the border, and I got to meet the trucks as they were unloading their precious cargo in Poznan Zoo. Again, it's not because animals are more important in this situation, but because you get to access the story or the situation in a different way, and you're not sort of numb, and you're not overwhelmed by the same story all the time. It suddenly comes from a different angle. So that was that was really nice to watch that happen.
Right, that's very interesting, very moving. Just let's move to maybe more serious, sorry, not serious, but different sort of type issues. The grassroots responses to the Ukraine crisis have been amazing. We know that the media talk about that everywhere. Initially, the support for the Ukrainian refugees and other citizens came mainly from the private citizens, from individuals, from non-government organizations, from the churches. Why do you think Polish people responded with so much compassion?
No, it's quite exceptional actually. I think it's happening on a number of different levels, because even when we were seeing the border crisis with Belarus in November and December, which we will return to later, we saw, half of the country divided along political lines, running around, not half the country running around, but half the country supporting these volunteers running around the border, helping people. And that was astounding already to be writing about back then, that people were just giving up their time, their money, their jobs, and shuttling between Warsaw and the border and helping people that were climbing through the marshes. I mean, I think there are old sort of logics in Polish social organization, which is like, you don't trust the state, you don't expect the state to do anything, but there's this old memory of the underground state, memory of partisan activity, and I think people are very good at doing that. I mean, I can't imagine ever in Australia being able to motivate my friends to actually physically go somewhere. I mean, obviously we don't have the same form of immigration issues, right? So I mean, it's easy to imagine that nobody would want to do that. But even if, they were down the border, across the border, I think we would still be expecting people to be deferring to the state and NGOs and people in positions of power. But in Poland, people don't expect that at all. They don't expect any help. They expect that they have to do it themselves. Secondly, I think the overwhelming thing is that Poles can see themselves in this situation. They absolutely, on a very, very sort of basic psychological level, can see that this is them. They're being invaded again. They're being displaced again by the same aggressor as in the past. So I think you don't really have to go very far to reach that kind of that fear in a Polish person. So that there's a deep empathy and understanding with Ukrainians, and also Ukrainians and Ukrainian-Polish relationships. And despite the right-wing rhetoric of the last few years, which has tried to drum up the sort of Wołyń or Bandersy sort of issues, nationalist issues where obviously Poland, Polish people suffered a lot. Excuse me. Apart from that, I think that there's a strong solidarity between Ukrainians and Poles, which makes it very easy to do something like this. And thirdly, I mean, it's a war which feels like a war that you remember from the past. It's not guerrilla warfare in a country that you do not understand in any way, where you don't understand, the political structures, where there are strange fault lines and strange schisms that, you couldn't possibly grasp. This is something that, you have Russia invading Ukraine. It's very literal, and people, people feel that this is something that they understand and that is very, very scary. So I think this is one of the reasons that we're so open to Ukrainians coming in.
Yeah. Yes, interesting. Now, some maybe cynical commentators point to the difference between the responses to the Middle Eastern refugees at the Belarusian border and this enormous support for the refugees from Ukraine. Did you notice that yourself, or would you
But do you
confirm
mean
that? Or
from on the part of the state or on the part of people, on normal people?
on the part of normal people as well?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, this is a difficult one to unpack because the simple answer is that all of the arguments that were being leveled towards Middle Eastern, African people crossing over the border suddenly evaporated when it came to Ukrainians. So you can actually catch people out in terms of the logical arguments that they make in terms of what classifies a refugee. For example, you were seeing people saying during the Belarusian border crisis, you were seeing people saying, oh, but they have iPhones. Oh, but they have money to come over here, or they have this or this or this, therefore they are not really refugees. Or, but these people have left their families behind, so that means that they're not really refugees, because if it was really that dangerous there, why would they be leaving their families behind? So there's definitely at the core of this, and it's not just Poland. I mean, I work for a centrist newspaper, and I was going through the comments under the pieces that I was writing in November about the border crisis with Belarus, and these stories, and they're just wildly different. One is like, this is so wonderful, it's so great that we're helping these people, and the one from before is just full of hatred. So, I mean, there's definitely, European xenophobia at the very root of dealing with refugees anyway. But at the same time, the way that the sort of the refugees were being instrumentalized in November and December, I mean, it was just horrific what we were seeing. So they were being deliberately starved, deprived of water, beaten, and kept in this no man's land between Belarus and Poland, so that they would become so agitated that they would throw themselves at the fence. I'm saying this as somebody who had many contacts in that camp at that time. So I was reporting as it was happening because I just happened to have some Kurdish contacts. So they were being really violently and instrumentally used for the purposes of destabilizing Poland and the European Union, and obviously that had to come to an end. But that does not mean that we should turn our attention away from what's happening, because I think in the last week we're seeing that the remaining camps that were in Belarus are being disbanded and people are being pushed over the border, but all the media attention is now in Przemyśl on the Ukrainian side, so we're not seeing so much reporting of that, and reporting is basically the only thing. We're banned from there. The media is banned from there. But you can still obviously report in different ways. It's the only thing that will hold people to account, and it's not Polish policy. It's European Union policy to push people back across. So, this is something that if you want to really cover what's happening and you really want to make sure that no abuses of human rights are happening, you need media presence. But we're all busy with a different situation at the moment.
Right. To organize effective, long-lasting help is, of course, logistically very challenging. Do you think that we may soon witness so-called compassion fatigue among the Polish citizens, among those who so warmly welcome refugees at present? And what can be done, and by whom, to soften this effect? What can the Polish government and the maybe EU do to help? After all, there are limits to how much individual citizens can do.
Yes. Sorry, I think I may have missed the beginning of your question, but from what I understand, how long can this process
So,
this
well,
change?
yes. Do you think, because some people mention that oh, it can't last that long. I mean, you can't look after those people in your private home. If you have 7 or 8 refugees in your private home, how long can you actually look after them? Not go to work, or if you go to work, who will look after them? And that's what will happen. It may be that people will start saying, that takes too long. We can't do it any longer.
Yeah, I mean, I think, this is absolutely the question that everyone's been asking right from the beginning, and particularly people like myself that grew up in a country where different structures take on the responsibility for these kinds of things. And it's strange though, because when you're interviewing actual people, volunteers, people helping out in the street, I say, well, what about the state? Aren't you angry at the state? And they just don't seem to care. Like, they think that the state is not going to be able to actually make much of a difference here. Whereas for me, the state should be taking on the risk of this responsibility. People are being, we are seeing minors being trafficked, women are being trafficked. This is not something that you can't just let, 2.3 million people into a country and just think that it will sort itself out. I secretly think that they just wanted to fill up the job market because they need Ukrainian labor. And, without thinking that it would only be women and children coming through, and older people, all of whom need welfare assistance. The children need to be put into school. For the women to go to work, there needs to be childcare. Putting people into homes where you're paying people to take in strangers is also really, really murky territory. We saw ads where people, we saw we saw notices, people putting up notices saying, I will take an attractive Ukrainian and her child. These situations are really, really rife with abuses, and you should not be putting people in a situation where there is no third party taking responsibility. But this Poland does not have any existing a very small existing assimilation immigration framework already. And we saw last year when the 1,000 Afghans, I think, were evacuated from Kabul by Dvorchik because they had in some way been of assistance to Poland in Afghanistan, that, these people have just been left in these centers. Everyone's forgotten about them, and they get paid 700 zlotys a month, each individual. So you can't actually leave the center to do anything. You can't rent an apartment to then go get a job. So it's going to be a very tough time. But I think the very strange thing is that when you're talking to the Ukrainians, is they all think they're going back home in a month. Everybody thinks that the war is going to end in a month, which is absolutely not how I imagine. I imagine if you get 2.3 million people coming into the country, then you need to set up that infrastructure for good. So the Polish government, just on a very empirical information, the Polish government has given everybody basic welfare status, so they have access to NFZ, so like the NHS, Medicare. Although Medicare operates differently, it's free healthcare. They get free subsidized medication, if not entirely subsidized medication. They have working rights for 18 months. But apart from that, really, most of the heavy work is being done by Poles, by grassroots organizations. I mean, these are the most visible things. When you go to Dworzec Centralny, when you go to Warszawa Zachodnia, the main train stations in Warsaw, you don't see anyone from the state. I was looking because I was writing a story about this. You don't see anyone from the state. Maybe you see a group who was given a tent by the city, by Warsaw City. But apart from that, everyone that's running around at the station are just normal Poles and Ukrainians. It's incredible.
In your view, the government support, although it is so prominent in the media, is not really sufficient at present.
No, I mean, at present maybe, but this is not how you resolve a situation like this. So we really do need to make sure that down the track something else comes in to absorb the risk of this situation. The European Union has offered to resettle the refugees in Poland elsewhere, but Poland doesn't want to do that because it doesn't want to be involved in that sharing refugees situation, because it wants to control what kind of people come into its country. So that's an interesting thing. It's getting money from the European Union. Don't remember exactly how much. So there is support from the European Union, but there isn't a tradition of that level of state assistance, right? We don't even have a very strong welfare system here anyway. So yeah, I don't even know if we have a discourse that can even support this notion. If everyone thinks that the government can't do something like that, and normal people think that, I don't know if we have a strong enough discourse to bring about that kind of change.
Mm-hmm. Not long ago, we witnessed anti-European Union criticism in UK and in some CEE countries, Central and Eastern European countries. There has been a change recently with the nations of Europe united in their action and in condemnation of Russia's brutal attack. So do you think that the Russian invasion of Ukraine will have a further unifying effect on Europe?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we are seeing NATO and the European Union now emboldened, and also because we are no longer pretending that Russia isn't a risk, right? We start to have an entirely different conversation. That means divesting from Russia. That means divesting from the energy sources that we were used to using. I mean, Putin played us very well. Obviously, we don't know if this was a long-term strategy or he just lost his mind, right? Because there are many different takes on what Putin's doing. But I think everybody knows that, you know, realpolitik is now back, and we have to be extremely careful about the choices we make. So being part of NATO and being part of the European Union is crucial here. What's interesting, though, is also that Poland is sort of obviously separating itself from Visegrad. I mean, not deliberately, it's just happening naturally, and becoming sort of a sort of frontline, I don't know, beacon of Europeanness in the north of Poland, and I do in the north of Europe. Sorry, and I do think that part of this is to do with, or maybe it's not so much to do. It's not deliberate, but it's really useful for Law and Justice, which has a sort of level of messianism to it. It wants a Christian world order. It wants Poland to emerge as a power in its own right, based on Christian, sort of spooky Christian superstition, Polish traditions. You know, that whole romantic arc that was traveling with Poland for 200 years of its need for emancipation sees resolution here, because that tension that we've been seeing in the last 30 years of Poland entering the EU, where half of the Poles were very happy to have joined the EU, the free market, what is understood to be sort of, you know, real modernity. The other half were not buying that. They were not happy with that. So I think this kind of conservative zeal and this conservative need to build up this maybe successor to the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth sees some kind of maybe resolution here with, you know, Polish people and Ukrainians, as long as the Ukrainians are not the dominant majority, or, you know, on a class level they're not as important as the Poles. They're no threat in other ways, then I think Morawiecki and Kaczynski are very happy with the situation they've been put in now.
Very interesting. I know this interview takes a long time, so I will just ask you one last question, if I may. So how much are people in Poland aware of the influence of so-called hybrid warfare, including the propaganda, disinformation, cyber attacks, on the outlooks of citizens of countries involved in this crisis? Because we know how much damage that can do. We see people here who stand for Russia, for example, confirming that what Putin is doing is justified.
Yeah, I think people are aware of it. I think everybody's aware of it because, I get emails from all of the institutions I work with saying, remember to change your passwords because we've been dealing with cyber attacks in the last few days. So I think people are very aware of the nature of the war, the nature of disinformation. When I'm on the border, I actually had to ask my paper. I said, you need to give me official documentation now because everyone thinks I'm from Russia today. Nobody knows where you're from. You really, really need to make a case now for being from this newspaper. I'm a trusted source. I'm a trusted journalist because everybody's aware of disinformation, especially Ukrainians, because obviously they are fighting this information war every day on Facebook, on Twitter. But also as journalists, we are part of that information warfare. We know the choices that we make in terms of what we report, whether we report Ukrainian losses or we report Russian losses. It's all a narrative. It's all framing, and you make those choices every day, so you are part of this war. I think everybody on many different levels is aware of it, but the question is what you actually do about it. I don't think any one person has a particular strategy in terms of dealing with it. I don't know, changing your passwords, making sure that you check the thing that you're posting actually has a source. I think it's a bit of a free-for-all at the moment. Everyone's aware of it as a problem, but whether anyone themselves is actually pushing back against it is a different question.
Look, this certainly is not an easy situation for people like you, Paulina, and I would like to thank you very much that you found some time to talk to us. I know that you are working 16 hours days, and so we are very grateful that you spent some time with us today, and obviously having those insights, your personal insights and your personal experiences shared with us, we are very appreciative. Now, I promise that the audience will be able to ask you some questions as well. So if there is anyone who would like to ask a question now,
I know who wants to ask.
Please raise your hand, and maybe through Robert we can
I think Malvolio wants to ask a question.
You will need to unmute yourselves individually when you ask a question, when Gosha allows you to.
Okay, may I ask the question? Jan Pakulski.
Sure, of course. Go ahead, Janek.
Hello, Paulina. Thank you for your presentation. Very interesting. Could you tell us what stories you hear from the refugees? Was there anything in those stories which surprised you or which moved you?
I mean, that's a super important question because what I do all of the time is collect these stories and publish them, and then I just don't remember them anymore. That's unfortunately the extreme cynicism of being a journalist, that you just have to, you're going through the meat grinder and you're just pulling out all of these things and then you're publishing it. Let me think. Anything in particular that was really, you're dealing with people who were I will have to, I can't give you one narrative of one person. That person I told you about before on the train was really quite striking. But I think, you know, a few of the really sad things that come out of it are people, you know, were trying to escape Ukraine. And, you know, one of the reasons all the trains were delayed coming into Poland was because the trains were being stopped to pull out, you know, men of fighting age. So people who thought that they were leaving with their fathers, with their brothers, with their sons, suddenly arrived in Poland without those people. And, you know, obviously, we know why that's the case, but there's just a very specific, you know, tragedy to the fact that people are being forced also to give up their lives if they don't want to do that. Seeing young men in Poland getting on the bus from Warsaw West Station, going back to Poland and saying that they just have to go because they need to fight for their country. It was a very hard decision, but they need to fight, and this is what they will do now. Seeing men who did not go back to fight, working with all of these NGOs and just being absolutely racked with guilt and feeling ashamed that they didn't go home to fight, and throwing in all of their effort into these grassroots initiatives, but still feeling deeply emasculated and like they are just terrible people, but at the same time knowing that they have no military experience, you know, they're white collar workers. They came over to Poland after their university studies, and now they're being asked to go back and basically become meat, right? And obviously, you know, the women that are coming across, as I mentioned, across the border with that are just crying. They're just crying to themselves, and they've obviously been crying for days now, so they're not sobbing, they're just exhausted and their face is just red from crying, clutching onto their children. The children, you know, are always incredible because they, you know, they're always this sort of burst of life in all of this, and they want that. Children have that amazing capacity where they're acting out their routines, or they're acting out their normal lives, even though, you know, they are surrounded by this absolute turmoil. But then also the children are the ones that, you know, you can see the trauma playing out. So they stop speaking, they go mute. We don't, you know, in these refugee centres, you don't have psychological help, and, you know, and this is the other thing, that these places are now crawling with journalists, and we know that in these sort of trauma situations you shouldn't be re-traumatizing people, especially children. So yeah, but then there are these really nice initiatives where you're seeing, you know, people, there's a campaign to publish and print and publish Ukrainian children's books, because they say that, you know, one of the best ways to pull these children out of trauma is to return them to a routine. And even if that's just reading a small book, a children's book in the evening with your mum, even if you're in a completely random place, that's enough. So the dimensions are unending, and that's the problem with journalism. We're just doing so much all the time that often we lose that sort of critical capacity to see the story anymore, because the job is to collect the stories.
Luckily, the children can go to school now, and hopefully will be helped that way.
Can I ask something?
Yes, of course, go ahead.
Thank you. First of all, Pusha, I would like to thank you very much for your exemplary, very interesting description of what's happening, and your very detailed report. I don't have a question as such, but I have as a kind of a plea. I don't know to what extent Polish people in Poland are aware of the fact how that they are held in an extremely high regard by the rest of the world at the moment. It's enough to talk to people on the street, people you don't know, and reveal that you come from Poland, that you often meet words of admiration and support that the Polish people are doing great things for Ukrainian refugees. I don't know whether Polish people in Poland know about it, but if I could please ask you, Pusha, just to boost their morale and their a general spirit, please let them know. Australians, the normal passerbys, they admire Poles now, and it's visible. I expected it. I met with that kind of attitude on a number of occasions. Please pass it on to our countrymen.
Well said, Adam. Well said. I must say this is true. Yeah, here to Irenka. Yes. Have to unmute yourself.
Sorry, Irina Zdanowicz speaking. Today, in this morning's internet edition of CNN, there was the information that the United States has given Poland $48 million for refugee aid. My question is, do we know where that is channeled and exactly how it's been used, and indeed whether it has been acknowledged?
So
my other comment is that in that same report on CNN, it was while what the Poles are doing was enormously praised and appreciated, the huge number of refugees coming into Poland was noted. There was also the comment that quite a number of those are continuing on to other countries. Can you tell us about this?
I missed the first part of your first question, sorry, because my internet sometimes cuts out, but I'll ask you about that in a second. As to your second question, nobody knows. Like, this is the problem. We're not getting any figures from anyone. The government releases the figures of who crosses the border into Poland. We don't know how many women, how many children. We don't have access to those figures, but they also don't have access to those figures. If I went to Zielona Góra train station and I spoke to the representatives and Zielona Góra is on the German border, right? And I spoke to the representatives of the voivodeship. So the voivodeship is the one that processes people. So people have to approach this desk. They cross the border, that's one thing. But when they approach this desk, they are actually properly registered. But not everyone actually approaches this desk because they go to a friend's house, they don't need state help, they go to a local church that maybe has pulled them out. So nobody has any figures. The people at this table said that they don't, they write these things down, but they actually haven't seen these figures collated into something larger. So it's very hard as journalists to actually report on how many people are in the country, what they need, where they're going, because the government is only releasing those figures that probably will bring in more aid or probably gives them more of a PR boost.
Pusha, can I just interrupt here and
Dorota
try to say something on that in that regard? to in order to also help answer that question of Irena. I think now that all Ukrainian nationals are being processed for the national ID number, which is called PESEL number, in a few weeks' time, the true number of Ukrainian nationals staying in Poland might be a bit more, concrete and will be easier to estimate. But at the moment, it's all in flux. It's just estimates. And a number of people, a number of institutions are trying to do these estimates. But because the situation changes from hour to hour, there are trains, for example, that are leaving Przemysl, that are going right to the German border here in Zgorzelec. The train doesn't stop anywhere, just for drinks and food at the station that it is passing, and it heads straight for Dresden, or the same on the Warsaw-Berlin line. So there are now also trains that are going right across the border, and on any one of those trains it could be 500, 700, up to 1,000 refugees, depending how many carriages the train carries. So that is also a thing that we have to keep in mind, that it's all, like Paulina said, it is very much in flux, but the PESEL number will give a little bit more light as to the actual numbers staying in Poland.
But Mama, not everyone is applying for the PESEL number.
Yeah. Right, are there any questions? Would anyone else would like to ask a question? We are at the moment at 7:56, which is we're coming to our time, 1 hour time that we sort of reserved for this meeting.
Can I just say something? This is Lisa.
Sure, fantastic.
I'm sorry,
welcome,
I didn't
Lisa.
interrupt, but Irena asked me a different question before Mama said something. I'm sorry I didn't answer your question before. And sorry, Lisa, I'll come back.
That's
to
okay.
you. I don't know about this. I don't know about the aid. I haven't been focusing on where aid is going or who's responsible for aid. But again, we don't know where anything's being channeled at the moment. We just know that lots of money and lots of aid just gets pumped through grassroots organizations, and if it doesn't get used up in Poland, it's shipped over to Ukraine.
I see. So it does actually get to the grassroots organizations.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Like for sure. For sure. Yeah. For sure. Sorry, Lisa.
I just actually wanted to thank you and for everything that you share with us, and I just wanted also to acknowledge that this is amazing what people are doing there, and journalists and civilians, and thank you, Alex, for organizing this meeting. And I just wanted to say that the whole crisis and the refugees are coming to Australia, and we are asking these questions because we want to find out like what's the real situation. But the situation arrived to Australia, and we have people who are Ukrainians who are coming to Australia right now, and we are, if anyone would like to help, so we can do that. Actually, there's a group of people who are working every day. Today we were organizing some medications for someone in Poland, as for someone in Ukraine actually, but we are sending that to Poland, and we are collecting money. We were sending some equipment to Ukraine. So today I participated in solidarity protest with Ukrainians, and we are exchanging information with them and what they need, because first Ukrainians arrived to Australia, and we are collecting clothes for them. We are collecting money. We are organizing accommodation. So if anyone would like to get involved and experience that firsthand, so please contact me. So I just wanted to say that thank you for organizing for this meeting, and for everything that you share, and you are doing fantastic jobs over there. So so that's really amazing. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Lisa, and also thank you for your action on Portal, and you're certainly spreading the news very well. Thank you. I just would like to say that yes, Paulina, I would like to emphasize what Adam said, that the media here and citizens and everyone here in Australia is praising Poland, and particularly Polish people who are portrayed here as heroes. And I think you can go back after this meeting to your colleagues and say what we are doing is actually appreciated around the world. So I think that's the message we would like you to go back with. And well, we now reached 8 p.m. So unless there is someone else who desperately would like to ask any question, I would like to close this meeting.
Paulina wants to say something.
Sorry, Gosha, I was just going to say, because I noticed that, I'm aware that we're running out of time, but I just noticed that Tomek is here. Hi, Tomek.
Oh no, we can extend the time. We can extend the time if you want to talk longer.
Tomek is taking in refugees quite regularly, so maybe he would like to say a few things about what that looks like and what the challenges are. I don't know, Tomek, is that something you'd like to share with us?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes. Well, our experience has been difficult, mainly because, as Paulina said, it's very grassroots. A lot of the support is coming through various channels, Facebook in particular, and so people are organising through those groups. We join to those groups, to those databases, and so literally within the space of a day, half a day, we get information about a family that's looking for accommodation, and then there's a decision that's made then and there whether you're going to take them or not. We took one family, which was two adults, a father and a mother, and then two children, 7-year-old and a 14-year-old. And the son was deeply traumatized by what he'd experienced in Kharkiv. Their whole apartment was completely leveled, and the son did not even have time to get a jacket. So one of the first things that we did, he actually got a jacket at the border, but it didn't fit him. And there was actually a Facebook group. I went with him to try and find him a jacket. We couldn't find him one. And a lady on the group said, look, take him to the shop and I'll buy him the jacket. So at a grassroots level, people are just incredibly generous. We managed to find them an apartment on day 2 of their stay with us, again, through the support of Polish people. They both now have work, again, something that was organised at a grassroots level. And now we've taken yesterday a family, a mother and her daughter and an 8-month-old, and they're with us now. And their stories are absolutely tragic. 4 days ago, they were in a park 40 kilometers from Kiev, and artillery shells were landing near the park. And the daughter was just in tears, describing the peace that she feels in Poland. And just across the border 4 days ago, this was happening. So it's very moving. It's very distressing for us. And we're just trying to help as best we can.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much. Thank you. Those stories are so important, first-hand experiences. And if there are any more stories like that, we would like to hear it today. So we don't have to close the meeting now.
Mama, you do things too with refugees. Maybe you'd like to share something.
Unmute. Sorry, can't hear.
Who was that?
I'm sorry. I'm thinking if the Australian society was geopolitically where Polish society is, it would probably do the same, because I've seen, in the past 10 days, we ran a fundraiser among friends, mainly in Australia, and among their friends, and many Australian, and the fundraiser is for orphan children who have been accommodated in the Kłodzko Valley in one of the pension houses, which is now being converted to the center for accommodating these children. And these children have nothing at all. They have no parents. They've just been evacuated from orphanages in Ukraine. And the particular house that we've run the fundraiser for is housing around 100 children. And they require some kitchen equipment to be able to cook for these kids. And it's very expensive because it needs to be the professional equipment. And so thanks to our donations, they will be able to buy that. And I saw that Australians with no Polish roots, with no Ukrainian roots, were giving, generous amounts of money. And they were saying to me or my friends who were, who were helping, look, if we can do anything, we will do it. This is the least we can do. We are so far away, but we are, they are feeling the same compassion that I think everybody else is feeling around the world. And yes, Poles are doing a fantastic job during the grassroots, but we also know that there is a lot of support for what we are doing from, I can talk about Australia, but I've also had donations from the States and from UK. And, there are people of goodwill, and it's immensely satisfying. And in all this horror, we think that by doing something, we are doing also autotherapy for ourselves, because otherwise we would be just sitting there, being horrified all the time. So I think it is just, and yeah, Paulina is right. The moment the Ukraine was invaded, we saw 1939 and burning Warsaw playing again in front of our eyes. And I think a lot of that compassion comes from that experience that we have in our genes, because we've been I think, sharing these traumas through generations. So it is now being alive. And in my small town, also refugees have been accommodated, and I'm supporting currently a small group of primary children who came to Poland with teenage carers, children not much older than themselves, thrust into the role of their carers because their parents decided to stay in Ukraine and defend their country and fight for the country, and they just sent the children along into the complete unknown with complete strangers, just trusting us as people they don't know, that we will do right by these children. So I've just been the sandwich lady making lunches for the kids at the primary school. That's another little thing that I've been doing, and yeah.
Right. And all those little things
right
matter.
now.
Yes, you're
yeah,
right.
Yeah, we think that
those
we need
little
to feel
matter.
them, make them feel at home, and just these little touches also help.
If each of us did this little thing, it would be so much easier for.
Yeah.
Yes, great. Unless anyone else would like to make a comment or ask a question, I think I will let Paulina rest, because that was probably a big effort for her in the morning on Saturday. So I would like everyone to thank Paulina again for her time and effort today. And until the next time, I hope that our next webinar will be as successful, and we will all meet again online. Or if not online, hopefully we'll meet face to face very soon.
In person, yeah. Thank you, Paulina.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pusha.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for all participants.
Thank you, Gosha, for organizing this.
That's a pleasure.
We really appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us.